Let me introduce you to the Super Retro-Cade. This is a brand new retro game plug-and-play console that RetroBit just announced a few minutes ago. Today I wanted to give you an exclusive look at what you can expect from this brand new device. So today we're going to break down the games, controllers, interface, and more in an attempt to answer this burning question. Is the Super Retro-Cade a console that should be on your radar? Let's find out. Before we talk about the Super Retro-Cade, there's another product I need to introduce you to. This is the RetroBit Generations, and it's kind of a mess. This little plug-and-play device was created to emulate nearly 100 arcade and console games, including fan favorites from Capcom, Irem, Data East, and even Jaleco. It came with a controller that looked like an old Genesis pad and contained an interesting selection of rare titles you can't find anywhere else. But a solid concept can only get you so far, and the Generations was brought down by poor performance, spotty emulation, a slow interface, and only a handful of big titles. It was a good idea that simply didn't live up to expectations. But if there's one thing that movies have taught me, it's that everybody loves a comeback story. Yes, the RetroBit Generations was a big letdown. But how great would it be if the company actually listened to the fans, learned from their mistakes, and came out with a plug-and-play device that more than lived up to expectations? If you're the kind of person that loves a story about finding redemption, then let me introduce you to the Super Retro-Cade, a just-announced plug-and-play game console from RetroBit hitting store shelves this holiday season. It's a $60 unit that just so happens to come with a few of my favorite games, including Final Fight, Strider, Codename Viper, Ghouls and Ghosts, Bad Dudes, Joe and Mac, Mega Man 2, Mega Man 3, and dozens more. And while it's incredibly easy to be skeptical of a Generations follow-up, I found at least a few reasons to be optimistic that RetroBit can pull it off. Let's start with the games. Much like the Generation, the Super Retro-Cade will be loaded with games from Capcom and Data East. But this time around, it's not just a couple of games you vaguely remember, but actual legitimate hits. You've already heard me mention Final Fight, Strider, Ghouls and Ghosts, Mega Man 2, and Codename Viper. But this new device also includes both 1942 and 1943, Street Fighter 2010 The Final Fight, Super Ghouls and Ghosts, Mighty Final Fight, Knights of the Round, Gunsmoke, Captain Commando, Final Fight 2, Final Fight 3, and Mercs. And it's not just the arcade version of Mercs, but also the Genesis port, plus the NES version of Strider, which is absolutely nothing like the arcade original. Over on the Data East side, we get two versions of Bad Dudes vs. Dragon Ninja, a couple of BurgerTime games, Side Pocket and its Super NES sequel, the controversial Fighter's History, the shoot-'em-up action of Heavy Barrel, and Karate Champ. While all this is cool and all, I'll admit to being the most excited about the additions of 4 Joe and Mac games. We get both the Super NES original and the sequel, as well as the 2 arcade titles. What intrigues me the most is the balance between the greatest hits and the hidden gems. I mean, sure, I'm not going to turn down playing Mega Man 3 on yet another console, but I love that this list includes something like Armored Warriors. That was the Capcom brawler from 1994, where you fight in big, massive mech suits. It never got a console release or found its way west, but Capcom did eventually tie it into their one-on-one fighting game Cyberbot's Full Metal Madness. This is the kind of thing that stands out when I look at the list of announced games. Now, I'm not blind to the reality that RetroBit could screw it up if the emulation performance isn't right, but I've been assured by the people working on the console that there's a real emphasis on quality this time around. They heard the complaints that critics and customers had regarding the emulation in their past product, so I'm hoping they're able to get it right this time. But even with all the assurances from RetroBit, there's still a few red flags that give me pause. Forgotten Worlds, for example, is a game that requires one of those joysticks that can rotate in a circle. When the game showed up on the Generations console, it was completely unplayable. I don't mean it was a little inconvenient to run, but it was fundamentally broken. The fact that it's showing back up on the Super Retro-Cade is worrying, and I fear that Heavy Barrel will also get lost in translation. I guess we'll see soon enough. The one thing that initially caught my eye about the Generations was the controller. When RetroBit first announced the system, they showed off a design that looked an awful lot like Sega's 6-button Genesis pad. I love that Sega controller, so I had high hopes for the RetroBit version. Unfortunately, it was quite a bit smaller than the Genesis pad and felt kinda cheap in comparison. They were okay, I guess, but they didn't live up to my expectations. The good news is that RetroBit has decided to ditch the Sega 6-button design, opting instead for something that resembles the controller that came with the Saturn in Japan. The blinding white gamepads offer 4 red face buttons and 2 shoulder buttons, not unlike the original Super NES controller. It looks comfortable, and I can see the shoulder buttons improving certain games, but it'll all come down to how responsive it is. Having said that, I do like that the wired controllers have a range of 10 feet, and that you can use them in your computer when you're done playing Final Fight. One of the problems I had with the Generations was the clunky interface. It was slow, bare bones, and not always easy to navigate. Apparently this has been given a major upgrade, and RetroBit is telling me that it runs a lot smoother and faster. It also sounds like they're going to make navigating the interface much more intuitive. They've added smart filters and faster ways to find the games you're looking for. Diving deep into the menus, we're given game descriptions, button tutorials, and more. What I would like to see is for those descriptions to be used to add real context to the games in the package. Tell us why a rare gem like Armored Warriors is worth remembering, and why Capcom decided to sue over Fighter's history. I feel like if you're going to give us a big collection of classic games, it's incumbent on you to explain why these games matter. I sure hope this is the direction RetroBit goes in. Beyond the descriptions, it's probably worth noting that the Super Retro-Cade also comes with an SD slot that allow you to save and transfer game progress. Oh, and there's an internal save option as well, just in case you don't have an extra SD card sitting around. This is also one of the only plug-and-play devices that comes with both HDMI and AV outputs. I'm not sure I'll ever have a use for that, but I'm sure there are gamers out there that still have SD TVs lying around, right? As it currently stands, RetroBit has only announced 53 games, which is just over half of what you can expect from the Super Retro-Cade. What's exciting is that this is only from 2 of the 4 companies. I can't wait until the full list is revealed and we can go over each and every one of the classic arcade and console games. I'll say this much, the 4 companies RetroBit has partnered with perfectly complement each other, with each bringing something different to the table. There are also companies with both strong arcade and console ties, so I can't imagine anybody being disappointed by the lineup of games. Of course, we all know that a great lineup of games doesn't amount to much if the emulation is crummy or the controller isn't responsive. It's hard to find the right balance, especially when you're dealing with nearly 100 different games. RetroBit has assured me that quality is important, and they've addressed most of the biggest complaints people had with the Generations. But I won't know for sure until I actually play the Super Retro-Cade for myself. The good news is that this is going to happen sooner rather than later. We're going to be getting an early preview build of the system later this week, so expect a full hands-on look at the Super Retro-Cade in the near future. Will this be the comeback story of the year, or is history doomed to repeat itself? I don't know about you, but I can't wait to find out. Hey, the video may be over, but I still have more to say. So here's what I want to know from you. Do you have any questions about the Super Retro-Cade? Like I said in the video, I'm getting a preview build in the next few days, and I want to answer as many of your questions as I can. Let me know in the comments below, and be on the lookout for an upcoming follow-up video with a hands-on preview. In other news, I recently posted reviews of Earth Atlantis and Silvio 2, and we have plenty more where that came from. So do me a favor and click the subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.